Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what part of the country you're joining us from. Welcome. I am Jennifer Spiegler from Kognito, and I am very, very pleased to welcome everybody today to a webinar we've entitled Bullying and Negative Outcomes, Promising Prevention Practices, that will be presented by Scott Poland. Before I turn it over to Scott, I have a little bit of housekeeping. I have a little commercial about Kognito, and I have a couple of poll questions. So we'll do this while I see people are still joining the webinar, but just to keep everybody busy, let's go ahead and do the housekeeping. So thank you so much for taking the time today, and a few items. First, the presentation will be recorded, and you will have access to the recording and to the slides that will be presented by Scott today. I'm sure you'll want those and want to share those with your colleagues. I've looked through the presentation. I think it's totally awesome, and you're going to get a lot out of it. You are, as attendees, in listen-only mode. That means you can't talk to us, but you can ask us questions, and I hope you will. You have a question dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you want to try out how it works, please say hi or send us a question or let us know what's top of your mind with regard to bullying prevention today. That would be fantastic. Let us know where you're from. And if you are so inclined, please connect with us. You can connect with us on Twitter at Kognito. And we are going to live tweet, and maybe if that's your thing, you can live tweet with us. Our hashtag for our webinar series is Kognito Webinars. You see it at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. So that is that. So who's Kognito? Kognito is a health simulation company that believes in the power of conversation to inspire and inform, impact how people think and act, evoke empathy, and change lives. It's a very, very big mission. We are a pioneer in developing role-play simulations that prepare individuals, including teachers and students, to effectively lead real-life conversations that change lives. Our programs for K-12 translate to hands-on practice and conversations that address mental health, suicide prevention, and bullying. And if you don't know about us and haven't experienced this really revolutionary learning approach, please do check us out at some point, but not during Scott's webinar. Let's take a quick poll. The first question that's going to come up, where is your organization on the continuum of bullying prevention efforts? Are you well developed? Are you developing your prevention efforts? Are you just starting? Are you investigating maybe what to do? Or are you, shouldn't be engaged, you should be unengaged. Oops, unengaged at the bottom of that. Wait. Okay. So I should go on to the next one. Okay, we're not doing that one. My bad. How important do you think relationships between students and teachers are in reducing bullying? Okay. Very important, somewhat important, or not at all important? Please let us know. Sorry for the technical snafu on the earlier question. Okay, we have a budding and very profound consensus. You all think it's very important, and we think it's important too. And to talk more about that, I am pleased and honored and delighted to introduce Scott Poland. Scott is the co-director of the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University. He is also a co-author of Suicide in Schools, which has become really the Bible for schools and preventing suicide. He speaks frequently on the topics of suicide prevention and bullying prevention, and I am happy that he is going to be talking to all of us for the next 45 minutes and then answering your questions. So, Scott, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and it's really my pleasure to have a chance to talk today. You know, I did work full-time in the schools for 26 years. Looking back on that, I've often wondered, did I do enough of a job in terms of promoting bullying prevention? Did I do enough to support the students that were being bullied? And as a school psychologist, I would often be referred a student who was being bullied. And when I would talk to them, I would always ask, well, did you let any adults know? Did you let a teacher know what was happening in the hallway or out on the playground? And sometimes, unfortunately, they would say, yes, I did let them know, and they told me to just stay away from those bullies. And I think we realized that for successful bullying prevention programs in schools, it really takes the entire team. It takes every teacher, it takes principals, it takes the students, and it takes the parents. And I'm really glad that you began today with really looking at universal programs that have to do with relationships. I actually read an article for the School Board Journal years ago called The Fourth R. For me, it was never about just reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was about relationships. And very importantly, we want every student to feel like somebody at school cares whether they showed up today or not. And we want every one of them to have a trusted relationship with adults at school. You know, and the reality of bullying, and there's actually an excellent website from the U.S. Department of Education called Stop Bullying Now. We know that it tends to peak in middle school. We know that approximately 15 to 25% of students are bullied with some frequency. I am very concerned about the number of special education students that are the victims of bullying. I'm also concerned about the LGBTQ population also being commonly the victim of bullying. It takes several different forms. We've all heard before about girls are more involved in what's called relational bullying, more about spreading rumors, more about making sure somebody's not included, where boys tend to be a little more physical, verbal statements, taunting, physical pushing, shoving, and kicking. We also know that the literature is saying the consequences of bullying may last for decades. And I think I would be remiss today not to mention that certainly bullying continues into adulthood. Bullying does take place in the workplace. There are many work locations where people are afraid to speak up, thinking that there will be consequences, especially when the person is your boss and they might have all of the power. And then let's go to why did only 1/3 of the victim of bullying actually tell an adult? And you know, one of the things about my background is I've actually responded personally to 15 different school shootings. And what I really believe, virtually every one of those should have been prevented. So the real question is, why don't kids that are being bullied look to an adult to help them? Generally, they are afraid that it will only get worse. It won't do any good to report it. They'll give me the impression that I somehow deserve this or I'm bringing it upon myself. And very frustrating because we actually have to have all of the adults that are capable and able to take stand, step forward, and get the bullying stopped, which would be a big part of the presentation today. Now let's look at what do we know about bullies. And basically, they do tend to seek out younger children, smaller, weaker, somebody with a disability. There is literature indicating that they may come from a punitive home environment. There's also literature talking about what is called the victim perpetrator. I don't know if you've heard that word before, but basically it means in one situation they are the victim of bullying, but in another situation with younger, smaller, or weaker classmates, they become the perpetrator. And at the basis of all of this is having trusting relationships between young people and all of the adults in their lives. Also interesting, the literature is saying that most bullies actually have very little anxiety. They view themselves positively, especially at the middle school level. It's clear that the bully can actually achieve some amount of social status and popularity, even though in reality their classmates don't really like them. Let's look at the most common myths about bullying. That they seek power because they're powerless. Actually, they can be very calculating. The bullying can work and help them get exactly what they want. There really is no indication that bullies have all had the pattern of previously being abused. And the real question is bullying a problem just for schools to solve, or is it really a societal, a community, and a family problem, which is really what I believe. And it's really important as we start talking about the parents of a bully and what they should be doing. What should the parents of the victim be doing? And by the way, the literature says really clearly, if your child is being victimized, as a parent, it is not a good idea to confront the bully. That actually happened here in Florida last year, where the angry dad got on the school bus, confronted the kid who was bullying his child, and the dad was actually arrested. So we'll be talking today about how should parents respond, and obviously we want them to be partnering with the school. So fighting back, and I still hear, even in today's world, well, if they treat you that way, you should just haul off and slug them. And I think we know in our schools today, when we have a fight, when we have a physical confrontation, both students are going to be disciplined. So today I want to say clearly, I am not advocating that those being victimized fight back physically. And unfortunately, bullying is not necessarily something that everybody does in fact outgrow. I'd like to look at this next slide and just look at the characteristics of this young man. Large middle school in Texas. So as he became a new student, the school staff knew that he had an extensive psychological history, several DSM diagnoses. He reportedly walked funny. He spoke with a lisp. He had a bad skin condition on his face that other students made fun of. He was described as small, pale, and very frail. He identified as gay, and he identified as Buddhist. Do you think middle school would be a miserable time for this young man? By the way, please be thinking about which class at middle school would be pure hell for him. And I suspect everybody came up with physical education class. Absolutely. And I want to be fair for discussion with our coaches and PE teachers. I mean, if you've got 60 kids in PE, admittedly, it is hard to keep an eye on everything. But I argued in a legal case, this kid should have stood out the moment he walked into the building as the one kid in 100 most likely to be the victim of bullying. And without going into great detail, I'm really sorry to tell you that tragedy was the result in this case. So let's look at building relationships and connections. I did mention this in my early comments, but I do want you to see the slides. I think we all need to realize that research on bullying prevention programs is still developing. I wish I could tell you absolutely we know that this program is far superior to other programs. That I'm going to simply say there are a lot of good programs. We need a buy-in from everybody, including all the staff and especially the principals. And I really like this comment from the U.S. Department of Education about positive interactions. Connections at school can significantly reduce bullying. You know, the fourth time I testified in front of Congress, Mrs. Walker was there. She was the parent of Carl Hoover Walker. Carl was 11 years old. He was a student in Boston. I'm really sorry to tell you that Carl died by suicide. But I'll never forget his mom's testimony. She says, I was the involved parent. I was the one that went to every single program the school had. I, in fact, told the school that my son was being bullied at school. They made Carl feel like he was the problem. They started charting his behavior in his classes. And the counselor made Carl have an unsupervised lunch with his biggest tormentor. Basically, as we go on to the definition of bullying, it's really about power. And let's look at that definition. So bullying is repeated over time. And the most commonly accepted definition is from the gentleman in Norway, Oveus. You know, some of our schools have been criticized for not using the Oveus program, but the Oveus program is extremely costly, and it doesn't really make sense that we're going to be able to train all school personnel in this program. It's also very interesting, why did Oveus become so involved in bullying prevention in Norway? A number of middle schoolers in Norway died by suicide, and victimization was believed to be strongly associated with their death. But bullying is about power. It is nasty. It is humiliating. One person has all the power in the situation. Bullying is not about conflict. It's about victimization. And especially today, cyberbullying is extremely challenging for schools and for families. I'll sometimes hear something like this. Oh, it was just one thing posted on the internet, so it wasn't repetitive, so it couldn't possibly meet the definition. Oh, but it was nasty and humiliating. But wait a minute, 75 students posted their support of the nasty and humiliating comments. So I believe when we have that amount of volume, it does meet the definition of bullying, and schools and families must respond. Let's look more specifically at cyberbullying. You know, I actually grew up in a home years ago where there was one telephone. There was actually a cord on that phone. Does anybody listening today remember that? And I swear to you, my mom sat next to that phone my entire adolescence. When I walked in the door, I was safe. It was a safe haven. Nobody could reach me unless they wanted to talk to my mom first. Today, we all know messages can be posted even anonymously 24 hours a day. The literature actually says that 1/3 of adolescent girls in this country get up in the middle of the night to see who posted what. And I'm actually really concerned about sleep deprivation with adolescents. And I'm really, if you're reading between the lines, I'm encouraging parents to take charge, to demand to know passwords, to let their children know all this technology, it is not a right. It is a privilege. And it's 10:30 tonight. Honey, give me your laptop. Give me your phone. They'll be charged and ready for you to go the next morning. So schools have really struggled with cyberbullying, things that were posted last night. Is that really something for the schools to get involved in? But I'm going to argue that almost every time the cyberbullying does impact learning. And school administrators do need to investigate. They need to work with local police and families, and they need to take action. and to be much more proactive, beginning in upper elementary schools and all the way through high school. We actually need digital and internet citizenship presentations in all of our schools so that students know what's the right thing to do and what's not a good thing to do. And unfortunately, the anonymity of cyberbullying, I believe, allows kids to post things that hopefully they would never actually say in person. So cyberbullying is a tremendous challenge. Schools cannot ignore it because it is going to impact school climate and learning. And one of the things that's also very universal that I've not mentioned as yet is that we need to survey our students. We need to survey our students and find out how big a problem bullying is in our school. Where is it occurring? Are there places that we need to increase our supervision? So build those relationships and survey our students to find out how big the problem is. There's been a lot of discussion today about bullying and suicide. We do know that bullied children are more likely to be anxious or depressed, and unfortunately, there is a strong association between bullying and suicide. Not a causal effect, although a number of parents have argued there is a causal effect, but the literature actually says strong association. We do know that suicide is now the second leading cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds in our country. We also know that the suicide rate has actually increased the fastest for 10 to 14-year-olds, especially 10 to 14-year-old girls. And when I read this national data that was released earlier this fall, I couldn't help but think bullying has got to be a factor with the increase in suicide for middle school girls. And you know, I naively thought in 2000 and 2002, when the Secret Service released their study of school shooters and said that 2/3 of them were the victims of bullying, I thought this would really prompt bullying prevention programs in virtually every school in America. Now, I am really pleased to say all states have some legislation about bullying prevention in schools. Some of those states even have legislation about cyberbullying. But to be honest with you, it took more than a decade. If you were to look, you would find most of the bullying prevention legislation in this country for schools is really in the last few years, not something that has been in place for decades. Let's look at the slide about raising awareness for school staff. And I've mentioned most of these points, except I want to highlight an excellent documentary. It's called Bullied. It's available free to schools from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And there's the website. It tells the story of Jamie Nabosny. Jamie was a gay young man in Ashland, Wisconsin. Jamie was harassed and bullied and beaten up at school for years. He even ran away from home because of that. And his parents had really very little choice but to bring him home. They promised homeschooling, but they couldn't really afford that. And Jamie had to keep going back to the local public school. Jamie sued, and Jamie won in really a landmark case. And the documentary recreates the trial. It uses the actual transcript. And it's a very moving documentary, and it's really designed to show to school faculty and then have a discussion about our school and what can we do better. And on that documentary, the school principals are basically denying that the parents ever complained and had conferences with them about Jamie being bullied. There's direct quotes from an assistant principal saying things to Jamie like, if you weren't so gay, this wouldn't be happening to you. And perhaps the most important thing I can say today is this. All the adults need to say clearly to the victim of bullying, this is not your fault. You are not bringing this upon yourself. No, you do not deserve this. We are going to get this stopped, and I am going to be there with you every single step of the way. So I highly recommend this documentary. I show it in some of my trainings. I certainly show it in all of my classes. So how can school staff help a student who is bullying others? First of all, we need to take action. Let's imagine that I'm a teacher. I've got a few minutes between classes. Oh yeah, I know there's bullying going on over here in the corner, but I'm in a hurry and I walk right by. What message did I just give everybody? Gandhi actually had a great quote. What we do speaks so loudly to our students that when we try to talk to them, they cannot hear us. We have to take action. But here's what a teacher might say. There's only one of me. You tell me in 5 minutes. How do I provide consequences for the bully, support for the victim, and make it a teachable moment for all the bystanders? Oh yeah, and they gave me 45 minutes of training on all of this. So it's a very challenging situation, and we really do need a team approach. And the bully needs to know, here are the consequences for today's behavior. No, I am not keeping this a secret. Everybody will be watching you, and if this bullying behavior continues, the consequences will escalate. And obviously, the bully needs counseling. We've got to make a phone call to their parents. Sometimes I'll ask teachers, when you know the kid's a bully, why do you hesitate? Why don't you pick up the phone and call their parents? And I think everybody listening is probably wondering, well, maybe the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. I don't want to be yelled at. We have to make those calls. And at the same time, we need to make sure parents do not feel that we are blaming them for the behavior of their child. We need a partnership. We need to conference with those parents. We need a referral for mental health treatment in our school or even in the community. We need to help the bully develop empathy. Maybe we need to get them involved in tutoring kindergartners under close supervision, help them develop empathy for other people. And as their behavior improves, obviously we need to reward them for when they are appropriate towards others. I'd like to make just a couple of comments about school policies. And all I can do today is very, very honest. The policies and the procedures always look pretty good on paper, but we need to make sure we are actually carrying this out. I was involved in a legal case in Texas where the young man, he was only in the 4th grade, he was sent to the assistant principal for discipline 30 times in the first semester alone. 30 times. The assistant principal viewed all 30 incidents as interpersonal conflicts. Can you all figure out why she viewed them as an interpersonal conflict, not thinking a single one of them involved bullying and being victimized? If she viewed it as bullying, she had to fill out the required paperwork. She had to investigate and document thoroughly, and that paperwork actually had to leave her school. So we need to make sure that we take the time and we investigate. We can't just dismiss everything as an interpersonal conflict. So moving on, Let's look at the role of bystanders. First of all, some people have said they don't like the word bystanders. The word bystander, by definition, it's about passivity. We should call it a witness. When somebody is a witness to something, that seems to imply you should do something. You should at least recount and tell somebody in authority exactly what you saw and heard. So these bystanders and witnesses, they're present about 80% of the time. They have a tremendous potential to intervene. They really need to say, we do not support this behavior. This is not what we want in our school. We are not saying this is okay. We are not going to laugh and reinforce the bully. In fact, we're going to try to support the victim. Literature is also talking about the bystanders who know they should have done something. They often report insecurity and anxiety later. And the research does say the bullying prevention programs that really emphasize bystanders and their important role are much more promising. And then the next slide is really, why don't they get involved? Well, they're not sure of what to do. Nobody has talked with them. Nobody has taught them about getting adult help or simply stepping forward and saying, we don't condone this. This is not what they want. They're concerned that there might be retaliation, that somehow things might get worse. And then the challenge, if we don't have that climate and those significant relationships, they don't trust the adults. They're not sure the adults can do anything to make it better. And here's a quote from the former head of Safe and Drug-Free Schools, Mr. Modzelewski. The bystanders have to have the courage to get involved. Let's look specifically at what school staff needs to do. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but they need to take immediate action, stand between the bully and the victim, demand that it stop, support the victim, but don't question them in front of others. And as I said earlier, we should never imply in any way, oh, you must be doing something, you somehow bring this upon yourself. It should always be, you don't deserve this, we are going to get this stopped. Support for the victim privately. Let all students know the bullying is not acceptable, and have a conversation with bystanders, role play, help them understand what they can do to actually intervene the next time. And as I said earlier, consequences for the bully. So this next slide, a little bit more of the same. Remember my comments, what I heard the last time I testified in front of Congress from Carl's mom? She said the counselor made Carl have an unsupervised lunch with his biggest tormentor. Some schools like peace tables, but a peace table doesn't work unless an adult sits down with them. And by the way, for the most part, my experience has been the bully is going to say the right things, the things that the adult wants to hear, but they're probably not going to change their behavior. So the two students are really not capable of working this out because the bully has all of the power. And I cannot stress enough, staff need to know who the bullies are so that they can be watching and they can intervene. And the victim needs to know, here's what we're doing today, here's how I'm supporting you. You must let me know if this continues, we will get this stopped. The next slide really looks at student involvement is really critical. I already mentioned surveys, student meetings, a bullying prevention task force in our schools, What about an anti-bullying pledge? I helped develop those in my previous district. It's something that students sign. We go over training, information for parents, where students are promising, I'm going to do my part to reduce and stop bullying in my schools. Also, drama and art can be a very great way for schools to get involved. Right here where I work, there's a high school. I can practically see it from my window. Nova Public High School did a program called Sticks and Stones. And basically, the students wrote it, they performed it, they wrote the music, they performed that too. They travel around Broward County. It is a bullying prevention program. So the arts can be a very powerful way to get students involved. We also need anonymous reporting. At the simplest level, when my wife was the principal of a large high school, we put little mailboxes down every hallway where students could report something anonymously. But I would imagine many of the people listening today are familiar with very sophisticated programs where students can go online and anonymously report issues that have to do with safety, violence, and bullying. In Colorado, where I was at recently doing presentations, they have the Safe to Tell statewide program. So we have to have a way that students feel like they can let the adults know. So interventions can take place, but we need to maintain their anonymity. So what if your child is the one believed to be bullied? Take it seriously. Do not blame your child. I'm going to be there for you every step of the way. Listen to them. Empathize. Let them know the bullying is wrong. Ask your child, what could I do that would help in this situation? Do not encourage physical retaliation. Step back, gather your emotions. Don't charge onto the school bus. Do not contact the parents of the bully. And really, as we go on to this one, it's like, who do I contact at school? That's really the next question. You start with the teacher. But what if the teacher really sort of minimizes, indicates, oh, I'll take care of it. No, it's not really a problem. You want the teacher to alert others at school because every student goes to multiple classes. They change classes, they're in hallways. And if we were to survey students and you were to simply ask, where do I think the most bullying takes place in my school? I'm going to argue they're going to say the restroom, they're going to say the hallway, they're going to say out on the playground, they're going to say on the school bus, which obviously raises the question of training for bus drivers, which is something I did for more than 20 years in my old Texas district. And if you feel like the teacher is not taking enough action, you need to go into the principal's office. And what if you feel like the principal of the school is not taking this seriously? Now we're going to the central administration. Because remember, you told your child, we are going to get this stopped. So let's look at how we can make children more resistant to bullying. You know, let's be honest. Some kids are much more of a target than others. Some kids seem to know how to kind of escape the situation. But something I think is really important for every single student is to find their niche. What do I mean by that? Something they are good at. Some activity at school, maybe extracurricular, or maybe in the community. Some place where they're successful. Some place where they feel good about their relationships and their interactions. One really positive trait, interaction, experience every day or even a couple times a week can go a long way to helping them not get depressed and anxious when they're in other difficult situations. So what strategies can we go over in the counseling office about how to respond, how to avoid and read the situation? What can we talk about at home about making sure that they do in fact feel when they walk in that door, it's safe, it's sheltered? Be alert for the signs of cyberbullying. Maybe they've been online for the last hour or so, and you can tell that they're now really upset, they're angry, they're tearful. We've got to keep clear lines of communication open, and every parent has to find that shared time when your kid will truly talk to you. It could be in the kitchen making dinner. It could be shooting baskets. It could be shopping. It could be driving in the car. And by the way, what I've learned over the course of my career is the less the adults talk, the more the kids talk, the better. And I'll sometimes joke that my own children, when I'm hearing about their frustrations and these challenging issues, I would respond with something really insightful when I would say, I'm not sure. What are you thinking? No kid wants the adults to say, do this, do that. You won't have a problem. So let's take a moment and look at the Suicide Prevention Resource Center brief about suicide and bullying. We could spend a long time on this, but it's probably no surprise. The very kids that are anxious and depressed, those kids with internalizing problems and low self-esteem, are very likely to be the target of bullying. And yes, when you are bullied, it does raise the risk of suicide. We're never going to control all the other factors, such as mental health, abuse, poverty, family issues, but certainly I would be remiss today if I did not simply acknowledge there is an association. Moving on, as we look at school environment as really a key here. I cannot overstress that. Family outreach. We need parents to know the warning signs of when their child is being bullied. We need to know parents to know the warning signs of depression and suicide as well. We do need to build relationships with every single one of our students. And in our schools, we got to have mental health resources. And we need more counselors, social workers, and school psychologists. And a frustration that I have heard in many parts of our country is, oh, my administrator told me as the counselor or psychologist, we can never refer the family for outside services. These students and their families desperately need those outside services. And we need to know exactly who in our community at the mental health center and private practice truly can help the student and their family. My final thoughts before we see what questions you might have today. School-wide program where all staff are engaged and cooperate towards a common goal. Through the surveys, finding out where we need to increase staff supervision. How big a problem is the bullying? Where is it occurring the most? You know, in my last congressional testimony, I cited the school superintendent where I worked, who said something like, Scott, if we were to survey our students and our staff, and we were to determine we had a problem in any of these school climate, school safety, connections, bullying areas, well, then we'd be held accountable to do something about it. Permission to survey denied. I'd like to think that that superintendent and all of them around the country have realized the wise administrator would want to survey and find out what the problems are, and then have his entire team with the students involved work on making things better. Take immediate action, consequences for the bully, support for the victims, getting all those bystanders or witnesses, whatever you want to call them, involved. And the final thing that I really cannot overstress today, when you know one of your students is the victim of bullying, do not hesitate to ask them directly, are you thinking of giving up? Do you think this is hopeless? Are you thinking you don't want to live anymore? Do not hesitate to ask those direct questions. Let's look at some resources and let's see what questions we have for today. There is the U.S. Department of Education website, stopbullying.gov. There's the website for the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University. There's the website for the Southern Poverty Law Center. You send them a letter on school stationery, they'll send you the documentary Bullied, free of charge. It would be an excellent video to show to all staff. So let's look at our Q&A.
Great, Scott, thank you so much. We do have questions already coming in, and anybody else who's out there, feel free to use the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen to ask more questions. We'll start with what we have in front of us. The first question is, how can school staff help the person who is doing the bullying? The behavior is proven to come from a background. Are there programs or services in place to help the bully?
Well, I think one of the things I mentioned, we have to conference with the bully. We want to try to get some insight into their behavior. We need to basically partner with their parents, and that means we have to approach the parents carefully so we don't imply in any way you must be doing something wrong or your kid wouldn't be behaving like this. We really need the parents to align with us, and we sincerely need to figure out how can we help the person that's the bully. And do they lack empathy? Are they not involved in any pro-social activities? How might they be responding if they have younger brothers or sisters? Do they do a good job taking care of family pets? How could we provide an activity closely supervised where they can learn increased empathy for other people? It's not going to be easy, and I'm going to argue that the earlier the interventions, being really honest, when kids have had severe behavior problems for years and years, maybe something's been going on for 4 or 5 years before they've been referred to me as a psychologist, it's going to be pretty challenging. I really hope that we can get more dramatic early interventions. And I'm talking preschool, kindergarten, first grade. I actually think those teachers spot children with severe problems really early. The question is rarely, where is the intervention for the kindergartner with the problem, and how do we get their parents involved and make things go better through dramatic early interventions?
Great, thank you. Are there, again, thanks for the resources on the page that just preceded this, but are there any surveys already available that can be used in middle school and high school? You mentioned surveys, climate surveys, etc.
Yes, there is one that I am very familiar with. It's called the SSARB, School Safety Assessment and Resource Bank. It is published by Cambium, and basically it breaks down school climate into about 5 areas: connections, bullying, safety, respect. And what happens with the SSARB is it is computer scored, and the publishing company actually directs you to resources. So if you scored low in one of the areas indicating a problem, it directs you to resources. So, and the other thing is, on that stopbullying.gov website, there's going to be more information about surveys and really active and highlighted programs that have been effective in schools.
Great. Okay, lots of questions coming in. You guys are super engaged out there. What do you suggest when parents of the bully are in denial that their child is a bully and refuse outside services? So that sort of points to the last comment about how to help the bully. But parents who are very, very resistant. I have another question here about parents when they're unsupportive and they're unengaged.
That's a really difficult one because, as I said earlier, the consequences are going to escalate, and that escalation will probably result in things like after-school detention. It will result in things like suspension. It could even result in alternate placement. And the more that we can get the parent on our side, maybe encourage them to visit the school, have them sit in the classroom, and at some level, we might even resort to, with today's technology, we might even need to film something to help them. And I realize that brings up lots of complicated issues for schools, but if we film something and actually showed them how their child behaved, and they may have to hear the news from more than one person. So they might dismiss one teacher thinking, you don't like my kid. But if they hear it from an entire teaching team, and again, it's all about how we approach the parent, because sincerely, schools want to keep everybody safe. They want to do the best by every single child, whether they be the victim or the bully. And the more we can convey that, so the parents don't feel like, oh, you just have it in for my kid.
Great. And back to the bullying and suicide relationship. And this has been there's been a lot of talk about this in the suicide prevention community. This person wants to know, how do you describe, or what language do you use to help explain that bullying is not a direct cause of suicide?
Well, I think it's, the SBRC brief is really pretty clear. I think that I like to use the word association or contributing factor. Now, what somebody is going to say, and they're absolutely correct, millions of kids get bullied every single year. Thankfully, very few of them die by suicide. I actually believe that in the suicide prevention literature, we've maybe gone a little far to try to minimize this association and connection. And as somebody who's lobbied, as Kognito has, for suicide prevention for years, whatever I can do to help schools realize we do need suicide prevention programs, we cannot dismiss the fact that there is an association here. And what is the most likely reason you'll be sued after a suicide? That will be the parents claiming, we told you all about the bullying, you didn't take it seriously, you didn't protect our child. So I think that if we acknowledge this connection that has the possibility of advancing suicide prevention in our schools, which I frankly believe is desperately needed.
Great. Okay. You talked about early intervention. I have two questions here regarding early intervention. One, I've seen research supporting bullying tendencies begin at age 3. Do you agree? And if so, as a nation, shouldn't we incorporate anti-bullying education at that level? And what would you consider dramatic early intervention? I agree we can identify them in kindergarten, but what more ideas, what are some ideas you would recommend? So let's talk about that 3 to 5 in a little more specifics.
Okay, great point. And I remember being in a principal's office, and I'm working with the older brother, and the principal says, Oh, you should have seen his younger brother. He was here yesterday. He was totally out of control in so many ways. And then basically we're thinking, wow, he'll be here next year. It's like, I desperately think we need these preschool interventions, and we need interventions in our families. We need personnel like mental health representatives that can actually go into homes and can basically be looking at relationships between siblings, can be helping parents to improve their parenting style. Have so many more of the resources are K to 12, but if we have school psychologists K to 12 that are available to take referrals and consult with the private preschools, if we had more psychologists employed in private preschools, all of this would help us catch these severe behavior problems early. And, you know, the legislation about bullying prevention really, it's directed at K to 12 public schools. But we really need to include private schools. We need to include preschools. So if we could broaden not only the legislation, but our resources and our sources of help, so we don't wait until the kid is, now they're in kindergarten, they don't know how to treat anybody, they victimize others. How do we back it up and get the resources to the preschool and to the family?
Great. And there's a question here. Some literature suggests anti-bullying programs are counterproductive and actually increase bullying behavior. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I really don't agree with that. I think I saw that one research study, but I think it's something we have to talk about more. And I'm just going to go with the U.S. Department of Education, stopbullying.gov. And they outline really clearly what schools need to do. And frankly, I think it's pretty effective when you have President Obama saying, we're going to do something about this in our schools. And so I would go to that website, and I tend to minimize any research that says trying to improve bullying prevention makes it worse. We've heard that before with the whole question of suicide and all those people that believe, oh, if we mention the term, then it might happen. But everything about suicide prevention and bullying prevention is we got to get everybody involved. We got to know what to do, what to look for.
Great. We have just a few more minutes, Scott, and thank you so much for hanging in. So many questions are coming in. So a lot of times the bullying prevention and bullying reporting falls to the counselor. And we have a lot of counselors on the line, in fact, today. And they have so many responsibilities. What do you advise them in terms of being able to lobby their administration for more time to be able to address these issues?
Interesting that I'm actually teaching school counselor candidates this weekend. And the duties of a school counselor can vary a lot between schools. Personally, I'm concerned when I hear school counselors have duties like cafeteria supervision, bus duties. School counselors need to have time to talk with children about problems. They need to do that in classrooms, in groups, individually, in private offices. And we do need to all lobby for the school counselor ratio to students being that recommended by the American School Counselor Association. If it was up to me, I would remove any testing duties that school counselors have. I'd remove any kind of supervision duties, and I would have them working one-on-one or small group or doing classroom guidance lessons, conferencing with parents, working with teachers, and I would remove so many of those other duties which largely fall in a clerical category. Nobody gets a master's degree in school counseling to do clerical duties. They got into it because they want to work with students.
Great. You have big applause on that from the peanut gallery out here. And I think that we should take this opportunity now, Scott, to let you say any last things. We have such a great conversation here, and I want to remind everybody that we'll be sending out your slides and a link to the recording. So much good information shared today. And for anybody on the line who's listening, there's a second session of this tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks to everybody on the line, and I'll let you close out, Scott.
Well, my greatest hope would be, as a result of today, those listening would basically say, let's have a task force at our school. Let's set up a meeting. I'm the counselor. Let's get the APs in there. Let's get a principal. Let's get the nurse. Let's get a teacher. Let's talk about what we're doing in our school, what's working, what could we improve. Maybe we do need to survey, but just have a meeting. You know, you've been in school now for, not quite 2 months, but how's your program working? Are we taking it seriously enough? And in one of the cases that I was involved in, the assistant principal's deposition said, I didn't see a single incident all year in the elementary school as bullying. Now, could anybody here possibly believe we have an elementary school where no bullying occurred? So let's look at what's happening and what we can all do together to reduce it and stop it.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see some of you tomorrow. Okay.